Today I'm going to show you how I made my brand new JLU Darkseid because, would you believe it, the two-part series finale where he made his debut turned 20 years old this month. Since Superman the Animated Series is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, I'm going to pair this Kirby favorite with another New Gods character, but one from New Genesis. Let's look at how I made Lightray first. Lightray is one of those designs whose recipe stood out very easily and kinda made itself for me. His body type is pretty close to my standby favorite Gods and Monsters Batman, and his face actually looks a lot like Superman's design from his own series. The one hang up were his hands. In my mind, this character is constantly flying or landing with his hands flatly stretched out, so I knew I wanted to recreate that. My first thought was to try the Gods and Monsters Superman hands, but it turned out they were much too big for him. What else can we try? Ra's al Ghul is just about the only other figure they made with those hands, and I just so happen to have some forearms left over from my recent Arcady Duval custom, linked above. Heat up the Gods and Monsters Batman forearms and then switch them out at the elbow to test it out. Oh yeah, much better. Plus the natural break of his skin to sleeve will be the perfect place to end Lightray's bracers. Let's see what other modifications he'll need. I'll start out by dremeling off Batman's thigh shapes, belt, and front of his collar. The rest of the collar can still be used, and we'll just reshape the front to be rounder with epoxy. Fill in his thighs if you dremeled a little too much, and then fill in around his belt to get a bigger shape. Lastly, we'll need to use a liquid epoxy-like filler to remove those seam lines down the front and back of his torso. For his head, I'll use a cast of Superman's head and begin by dremeling his hair down and off. Get your epoxy back out and form his headband and face frame shapes. He ends up looking like Gambit or something out of Invincible, but I think it'll all come around and turn out by the end. He has gold armor wrap type things on his forearms and his shins. To make those, mix up some more epoxy, flatten it out, wrap it around, blend the seam, and then cut those band lines in with your X-Acto knife. I've done this quite a few times, and it can be tricky because you have to sculpt it thick enough to be able to cut into it, but then not cut so far into the clay that you go all the way through to the figure. If you put too little epoxy, you'll cut through too quickly, but if you put too much, you may not cut down far enough once you dremel the thickness down. If you don't cut enough, you'll lose your lines completely and then have to either draw them in or cut them in by hand after the epoxy is hardened. If that didn't make sense, it should clear up once you see the process here. His neck will need some epoxy both to cover his cut pattern and to add a collar all the way around. His belt will need to be thickened too. At first I was going to make a rubber belt and try to retain the waist articulation, but opted to just sculpt the belt in layers and forego the movement. You don't get much, if any, movement after painting anyway, and he's going to be posed straight up on a flight stand with his arms out as if he's landing, so we won't need to turn his waist. I sculpted the bottom of the belt first, and then added the top half to get that necessary split seam all the way around. The final part of his belt will be his square buckle that I'll add in a bit. For his chest symbol, I'll roll a ball of epoxy, flatten it out, press it on, and then cut in the shapes needed using my X-Acto knife. I'll dremel and sand everything down until it all looks like the right thickness and shape. His hair comes as a surprise help from a Marvel Legends X-Men 97 Jubilee figure. I needed her coat for a completely different recipe recently, but then I realized I might be able to use her hair for Lightray. Dremel it down a little, remove those hang-down curls, and I think that could work. The last bit before the belt buckle will be to go back into the wraps with your X-Acto knife and cut your shapes back in so they're not lost. That actually might be my best attempt yet at these arm and leg wraps. I'll add a square belt buckle and then prime and paint him. Lightray has a very simple color scheme, and the white bodysuit will allow us to prime him with dull coat and then again with a white primer. I just popped his forearms out and his head off, and it worked very well since the rest could go white. After the primers, I'll start with some Vallejo white on the majority of the suit, followed by a golden yellow for his belt, collar, shin guards, gauntlets, and headpiece. A little Vallejo red on his symbol, and black for his trunks and the background of the symbol. Give those all a few coats until they're fully covered. Paint his skin color on his face, and then get your paint pen out for his facial and helmet details. Alright, he looks great. A minor character for sure, but get him on a flight stand next to Ryan and he fits right in building up my universe. From one new god to the next, let's look at making Darkseid's combined design with Brainiac from the series finale of JLU. Darkseid's recipe was one I thought I had nailed down from making my first STAS design figure of him, but I decided to change it this go around. You see, he's a very tall character in the comics, but much closer to Superman's height in the DCAU. I originally used a BTAS Bane as a base and kinda convinced myself that he was a happy medium in size between comic and the show. The truth, though, is that he was just too tall. What can we do? Luckily, what I believe to be one of the best designed and overall best functioning figures in the entire animated line is the perfect size. Who might that be, you ask? The BTAS Lockup figure. He's wonderfully bulky and the perfect height, but those arms are a little small for this god. The two things I'm keeping from my previous recipe are his head and arms. His head was a modified Etrigan, and his arms were BTAS Bane shoulders with TNBA Bane forearms. Aside from the length, that's exactly the build I was looking for to make my Darkseid. Lockup just didn't exist at the time of my first version. What should I do with my old one? Stay tuned later this year to see what Justice League character I'll make from him and leave your guesses down below. Alright, let's see how we can turn this Dayglow Lockup into the Lord of Apocalypse. I mentioned the length of his arms, and that's where I'll start, by trimming them down with my disc Dremel. I'll switch Dremel bits and start dremeling off his Venom arm brace thing, and then cut the right wrist cuff off and even the arms out a little bit. We'll need to Dremel off some more details that Darkseid won't need, like his pant stripes, belt, and low chest line. I want to see how this is going and where it's headed, so I'll grab my white paint pen and start sketching his circuitry patterns and shape of his skirt. Oh yeah, that's going to work out great! Let's build up his gloves and fill in where Bane's gauntlets ended, and then do similar work down on his boots. Darkseid has much bigger feet than Lockup, so I'll start building those up and rounding them out. I think for his skirt to work best, I'll need to remove the rubber crotch piece on Lockup. Back up to his arms, I'll sketch in his shoulder armor with my white paint pen again, and then form the epoxy right over the top of it. I'll build up his neck to thicken that up and cover Lockup's details, and then come down and do the same on his stomach. This will form the start of his white diamond shape, and the thickness here should match up nicely with the thickness of his skirt, so we can just use paint for that part later. After getting this far, I'm realizing that the TNBA Bane hands are just too small for these gloves. In looking through my spare hands, I came across Etrigan's fists, and I think those will be much better. I'll just need to Dremel into the wrists deeper for the pegs to fit. After the previous epoxy additions have cured, I'll add second layers to his gloves and then down on his boots, as well as cut in those shoe sole detail lines. Now it's time to start on his skirt piece. In order to conserve on my final material, I'll make prototypes and revisions with a paper test and then transfer to the rubber afterwards. Start by laying the figure down on the paper and getting a rough idea of the size. Do some guesswork at first and then keep refining until it all looks right. I use my white paint pen again on the black rubber and then cut and test fit. Looks good, but I'll wait to glue it on just yet. For his head, I mentioned I'm going to make a copy of my original Darkseid, who was made from an Etrigan base, so I'll use this blue mold for a test. It works basically the exact same as the old yellow stuff I had before. I'm going to put it all the way around his head and hope I can get it out after the liquid resin cures. In all of this tinkering, I've noticed that his legs started getting loose without that surrounding rubber hip piece he had. To fix this, I'll pop his legs off again and then put a dab of super glue on the ball. Reattach the legs and then move them around every 5 seconds or so. You want the glue to start drying and forming a coating, but not so much that it glues completely in place. A couple minutes later and you should be good, and his hips will be nice and tight again. Back down to his boots, I'll make them even bigger. This design really did give him some pretty big feet, so I need to capture those. His shoulder harness piece is something we haven't touched on yet. I'll attach it to the torso and then sketch on where I think it needs to be cut. Switch to the disc Dremel and trim the sides off, as well as the middle connecting chains on the front and back. It's time to check on his head. All set, but it's pretty tough to get out of there. What if I Dremel the neck hole and then use pliers to force him out? There we go. That cast turned out really great, very clean. Back down to the boots again, and here's a trick to cover articulation pegs. I like to roll a thin amount of epoxy out and wrap it in a circle around the joint. Once that cures, you can then add a dome of epoxy on top of it and then Dremel and sand it down afterwards. The first epoxy ring will prevent your dome from getting in the hole, and you'll retain your articulation while getting rid of the eyesore. Coming back to the shoulders, I'll add the other domes that I assume reference Brainiac's classic 3-dot design. I'll fill in Lockup's chest line with some of my Vallejo plastic putty, and then add the little extra shape in his chin, as well as the parts of his gloves that stick up and protect his elbows on the sides. More domes for his hands in the form of the wonderful little sticky dots I found on Amazon a few years ago. They come in various sizes, and I use them wherever I need that perfect round shape and want to save time instead of sculpting. They do have a sticky backing, but I found that gluing the whole thing on is a much more permanent way to keep them in place. For this instance though, I'm going to use my disc Dremel to flatten the domes down so they look like thick circles. Back up to the harness, I'll sketch and cut a paper sample for the middle connectors, trim the pads again, Dremel the dots down, and then make the rubber connections and glue them in place. While the glue is out, I'll attach a skirt and then make his white edition glove details out of rubber as well. Glue those on, and now he's really taking shape. Treat the boots the same as the gloves, with the pieces sticking up to cover his knees and then the rubber line details down the shins. Alright, I think we can start painting. This Darkseid design is certainly different than the usual STAS look since Brainiac has his influence, but the base ideas are still there with the gray skin, black shirt, gloves, skirt, and boots with the blue cel-shaded shines. I'll start with his gray skin on his face and arms. Next, I'll paint the harness white and then pick out those red M&Ms on his shoulders. Red eyes, blue shading on his head, because black covers blue much easier than blue on black. Carry that blue down onto his body armor in stripes wider than you'll eventually end up with. Cover them with black, black on his helmet and cracks on his forehead, blue pants, black boots, black gloves, with those Dremel domes painted red, and then paint on his white and red torso details on his stomach and skirt. Lastly, because I cast his head in white, I wondered if I could scrape away the paint to reveal the circuitry design on his head. That worked great, but I'll still paint the white on top to get a nicer, cleaner look. And there he is. I've been waiting quite a while to finally be able to recreate this iconic moment on my shelf, and it's really great to see it in person. If you're wondering, I went the super simple approach with Superman and Dremeled his lips down to paint on his gritted teeth and add paint pen scratches and peach paint where appropriate to match his battle damage he received while fighting Darkseid up to this point in the episode. The shockwave effect is simply two pieces of a knockoff Tamashii wind effect, and I think it really adds to the frame. The final touch are the floating rocks, and you can really feel the impact of this one. What do you think? That's all for today. Thanks for watching. As of publishing, next month will be the cinematic debut of the new Supergirl movie, so I'll finally be making the blue-suited JLU design for Supergirl. Since that episode featured a love story between her and Brainiac 5, he's the natural choice for her pairing. It should be pretty cool to see those two join my collection, so you won't want to miss it. Thanks for checking this video out today, and go explore my catalog of shorts and videos after this. My Instagram link is in the description if you want to see even more customs and some neat photos of them. Feel free to like and subscribe to get notified for everything, and then hit the hype button down below if you'd like to help me grow. Have a good one, and happy customizing.